In this video, we'll be looking at the impact of the Great Depression on Germany and how it led to Hitler's rise to power. So, in the last video, we saw that by the end of the 1920s, the Nazi Party was still relatively weak. These were known as the lean years of the Nazi Party, because although the party had reorganised and grew in membership, it was struggling to win votes in elections. Under Gustav Stresemann, the economy had managed to stabilise in what were called the golden years of the Weimar Republic. A common theme on this topic is that when times are good, people are less likely to support the extreme parties and would vote for the more moderate centrist parties. However, in October 1929, this stability came to an end. At the beginning of the month, Stresemann suffered a heart attack and died, removing an important stabilising figure in German politics. Weeks later, the Wall Street crash occurred in the United States of America. This triggered a global economic crisis known as the Great Depression. And if you thought the 1923 economic crisis was bad, well, this was on a whole other level. So how did a crisis thousands of miles away affect Germany so severely? Well, if you remember, during the 1920s, Germany's economic recovery depended heavily on American loans. For example, under the Dawes Plan, $250 million was invested into Germany, and billions more were invested by American banks. However, when the American economy collapsed, US banks demanded their loans be repaid from Germany. Germany could not afford to repay these loans, and as businesses failed or cut back on production, they were forced to lay off workers in huge numbers. Unemployment rose dramatically, from around 1.3 million in 1928 before the crisis, to 3 million by 1930, to 6 million by 1932. That meant roughly 1 in every 3 workers in Germany was unemployed. The impact on ordinary Germans was severe. Poverty and homelessness increased, with many people building shanty towns from makeshift materials. Soup kitchens were common, and many families struggled just to survive. But how did this crisis help for Hitler to rise to power? As conditions worsened, many Germans lost faith in the Weimar government and began turning towards more extreme parties that promised solutions. This was not just far-right groups like the Nazis, but also far left-wing groups like the Communists. Hitler's message did not change, but it now reached a much more receptive audience. He blamed Germany's problems on the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar government, and Jews. Hitler's speeches made people believe that he could restore Germany's greatness once again, and in a time of fear and uncertainty, these messages gave people a sense of hope. So, as unemployment rose, so did support for the Nazi Party. Another key reason for the Nazis' rise to power was the growing dissatisfaction with the government. Chancellor Heinrich Brüning was chosen as the man to get Germany out of the Depression, but the policies he put forward were very unpopular. As he could not afford to pay unemployment benefits to millions of people, he started to cut government spending and also raise taxes. Brüning struggled to pass his unpopular policies through the Reichstag, and as a result, he increasingly relied on Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. This allowed the president, Paul von Hindenburg, to rule by decree in times of emergency, which meant that laws could be repassed by the Chancellor without the approval of the Reichstag. Some historians argue that this marked the beginning of the end for parliamentary democracy in Germany before Hitler even got to power. As people were distrustful of the government, they looked for a solution in Adolf Hitler. At the same time, the Nazis were becoming more effective at gaining support. Hitler appointed a man named Joseph Goebbels as the head of propaganda, and he took advantage of modern methods such as radio broadcasts, rallies, and newspapers to win voters. He printed millions of leaflets and posters to persuade people, such as this one from 1932, saying that Hitler was their last hope. The Nazis also expanded the SA, which grew by millions of members in the early 1930s. They protected Nazi meetings, intimidating opponents, and created an image of strength and order. All these factors helped to increase Nazi support dramatically. Whilst in 1928, the Nazis had around 12 seats in the Reichstag and about 2.6% of the vote, by July 1932, they won 230 seats and 37% of the vote, becoming the largest political party in Germany. But where did this support come from? Well, the Communist Party mainly attracted support from the working class in the cities. But interestingly, in contrast, the Nazis gained their support from a wide range of groups in society. Many unemployed people supported the Nazis because they promised jobs. Many women were drawn to the Nazi promises about protecting family life. The The middle classes, such as shopkeepers and small business owners, feared communism and were attracted to Hitler's strong leadership, whilst many young people were attracted to the energy of the National Socialist movement. Finally, wealthy industrialists supported the Nazis because of the nationalism that the Nazis preached, promising that Germany would be strong once again. So within just a few years, the Great Depression had transformed the Nazi Party from a fringe group into the largest political party in Germany. However, there was a problem for Hitler. Being the largest party did not automatically make him Chancellor. The Chancellor had to be appointed by the President. Hindenburg was the former Field Marshal of the German army during World War I, and his family came from the landed aristocracy in Prussia. He actually didn't have the best track record with democracy because during World War I, he sort of turned Germany into a military dictatorship with General Ludendorff, who we saw during the Munich Putsch. Anyway, he personally did not like Hitler and looked down on him. Maybe because Hitler was only a corporal in the army, maybe because he was a foreigner, or maybe class background as well. Hindenburg saw the Nazis as a violent and extreme party, and he wasn't wrong. So instead of going for the chancellorship, in 1932, Hitler attempted to gain power by standing in the presidential elections against Hindenburg to win the president's enormous political powers. The other main candidate was Ernst Thälmann, the communist leader. Hindenburg won in a runoff election, but Hitler had received millions of votes and had presented Hitler as a serious national leader. Meanwhile, political instability in Germany continued to grow. Brüning fell out with Hindenburg and was forced to resign in May 1932. Hindenburg then appointed a close friend and fellow conservative, Franz von Papen, as Chancellor. Papen had little support in the Reichstag, and so he called an election in July 1932. This is where we see the Nazis winning mass support, becoming the largest political party in Germany. Hitler demanded to be made Chancellor, but Hindenburg refused. Like Brüning before him, Papen relied heavily on Article 48 to govern. His government became known as the Cabinet of Barons because it was dominated by conservative elites rather than elected representatives. In 1932 alone, presidential decrees was used 66 times, up from only 5 times in 1930, and the Reichstag rarely met. Another election was held in November 1932, but as Papen lost even more seats, he decided to resign, and another close friend of Hindenburg's, Kurt von Schleicher, was appointed as Chancellor. He actually asked Hindenburg to suspend the constitution and make himself the head of a military dictatorship, and to be fair to Hindenburg, he said no. Schleicher realised that he also had no support and would need to resign. At this point, Germany was in a political crisis. 3 chancellors had failed in less than a year, and no stable government could be formed. Hitler was still the leader of the largest party, and so, in January 1933, politicians began making backroom deals. Papen believed that the politicians could control Hitler if he became the chancellor. The plan was to limit Nazi influence. Only 3 Nazis would be allowed in a cabinet of 11 ministers, whilst the majority of the government would be conservative politicians. Papen himself would be made vice-chancellor to control Hitler. They also believed that they could use Hitler's popularity to gain support and inspire the masses, whilst keeping real power in their own hands to pursue their policies. So, on a fateful day on the 30th of January 1933, Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany. And so, Hitler was forced to compromise, and the Nazis did not have complete power just yet. But the politicians would have no idea of what was about to come. Over the next 18 months, Hitler would take a series of steps to destroy democracy and establish a dictatorship in Germany. And that's what we'll be looking at in the next video on Hitler's consolidation of power. See you then.